people often also talk as if she like was bringing all these radical, unexpected things into. But if you think about it, like there's nothing radical or unusual about getting your period. There's nothing radical or unusual about masturbation. She was actually putting profoundly normal things into fiction, and people were then losing their minds.
Right. So it was radical because she was writing about it.
So she was writing about it.
Yes.
And she was writing about it in a vocabulary meant for 11 or 12-year-olds.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Blasik, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so excited to welcome you to our event with Mark Oppenheimer, presenting his new biography, Judy Blume, A Life, in conversation with Callie Crossley. Mark Oppenheimer is a journalist, historian, expert on American religion, and the acclaimed author of 5 books, including the memoir Weisenheimer and Squirrel Hill, about the aftermath of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. A longtime Blume aficionado, he has taught at NYU, Stanford, Yale, and Washington University in St. Louis. His new biography of Judy Blume pens a beautiful, multifaceted portrait of the acclaimed author through extensive interviews with Blume herself, invaluable access to her papers and correspondence, and thoughtful analysis of Blume's beloved novels, including early unpublished works that shed light on the path-breaking writer she would become. In the words of best-selling author Tayari Jones, at last, a biography of Judy Blume that is worthy of its subject. Writers and readers alike will leave this work emboldened, inspired, and encouraged. Joining him is Callie Crossley, journalist and host of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley on GBH, where she also shares radio essays each Monday on GBH's Morning Edition. For her work in radio and television, she has received numerous awards, and in 2015 was inducted into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame. Now, please join me in welcoming Mark Oppenheimer and Callie Crossley.
Thank you.
So we're going to start this way. How many of you are avid Judy Blume fans? Oh, got a few in here. Okay. Just wanting to know where the audience is in terms of their obviously you have interest, but in terms of your fandom about Judy Blume, because boy, she has a big fandom, and Mark was able to tap into that. So I want to start at the beginning, as we often do, with understanding Judy's roots, so that we can begin to understand how she came to be the Judy Blume that we know as the author.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this. Thank you all for coming. It's great to be back here. I was saying to the owner a few minutes ago that the first reading I ever did 6 books ago was at the Harvard Bookstore. I published a small book with a small press, and the only bookstore I think that gave me a reading was this one. So that was 2003. So it's really good. It's good to be back with a few more books under my belt and a few more gray hairs. So her roots. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that Judy was born in 1938. She's 88 years old, and that's really important because people tend to collapse like everyone over 60 into one generation as if they're all boomers. But Judy is pre-boomer. I mean, Judy was, she's not a child of the 60s or 70s. She's a child of the 40s. She remembers when World War II ended. She remembers being on Bradley Beach in New Jersey and hearing that Japan had finally surrendered. She remembers hearing about, as the 40s wound on, as the news came out of Europe about what had happened to European Jewry. She remembers realizing that the cousins they hadn't heard from, they weren't going to hear from. By 1960, she's married. By 1963, she's the mother of 2 young children. So this is all well before second wave feminism. I mean, she is a full half generation before that, which makes it all the more remarkable what she accomplished when she created this career out of nothing, as she was almost 30 years old, having already married while still in college before her senior year, having had 2 children very quickly thereafter. So that's the first thing, is generationally, she's 10 years older than my parents, and that's like important for me to bear in mind.
No, I think it's important to say that our myth about her is that she's not.
That's right. Our myth about her is that she's eternally youthful, and we can't believe that she would be even 78, let alone 88. And the other thing is that she is a child of suburban New York. She grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, not far from Newark. Her mother went to high school with Philip Roth's mother, which I think is just a fun fact about her. There's a great story that that Mrs. Sussman, that's Judy's mother, and Mrs. Roth met on the street one day, and Judy's mom said to Philip's mom, what do you do when people think that the mothers in the stories are about you? And Mrs. Roth said, well, you just have to tell them it's fiction, right? It's all. So, she's from a certain suburban Jersey milieu. And the other thing is that she was very much formed by she's not the daughter of immigrants, but she was the grandchild of immigrants, Jewish immigrants. And although she grew up in a fairly diverse town and had friends who were not like her, she very much grew up in a Jewish cultural space that very much formed who she was. I think that also formed her expectations that she would marry young and have children and be a wife and a mother. And so she generationally and in terms of her gender and her cultural background, she was raised to be a certain kind of person. And a lot of what her career became, as we'll talk about, was breaking free of some of those expectations.
Well, the reason I wanted you to start with her roots is because as you read the book, and by the way, I devoured the thing. It's really good. So let me just give him that kudo right at the beginning. She's so sheltered. And I mean, she writes about realism. And you make that plain about how she was always she knew what was going on in the world, as you just said. She remembered these incidents, but she wasn't like other kids in that she put them out there. They very much were a part of her. And so to see the work that she developed later as an author with the kinds of real issues that kids certainly responded to, seems like it wouldn't come from somebody who was raised in that environment.
Right. No, she basically had no trauma growing up at all. I mean, I think just in today's terminology, except that she lost her father young, and she was very close to him. He died a couple weeks before her wedding. And his family, he was one of, I think, 6 kids, all of whom died young, like in their 40s, 50s, or, I don't think any of his brothers made it to 60. So her dad spent his life in Judy's childhood thinking, I'm not going to see my daughter's wedding day. And in fact, he didn't. I mean, he died a couple weeks before it. It was like something out of a sad fairy tale, I guess. But he had he'd been in a dental practice he was a dentist, Rudy Sussman, with 2 of his brothers, and they both had predeceased him. So the practice had gone from being the 3 Sussman brothers to the 2 Sussman brothers to just Rudy to then no more dental practice. And so that was very painful. But otherwise, life had been really idyllic. They were sort of on the upper end of middle class in a town where that puts you at the top. It was not a rich town at all, Elizabeth, New Jersey. They lived in a very secure, nice neighborhood. Her friends loved coming to her house because it was clean and pretty, and her dad was a lot of fun. I mean, I heard this from old friends of hers who are still alive. He said, we all loved going to Dr. Sussman's house because he was such a delight. He was a warm, loving father, and not all of them had warm, loving fathers. So, I mean, she's somebody who felt on her wedding day probably, I mean, she had misgivings but she kind of tamped them down. But overtly, to all appearances, she felt like she'd sort of solved it. I mean, she found a husband. I always say he had the big 5. He was, tall, dark, handsome Jewish lawyer. I mean, that's like, what's better? He's not tall, dark, and handsome and Jewish and a lawyer. He was 6 years older. He was in the Army JAG Corps. He was an Army lawyer. That was his, Korean era service. There was still a draft then.
But Mark, he was boring.
Well, that's right. Yes. I mean, that's the punchline. Right? She thought she'd solved it all, but it turned out he was not a lot of fun to be married to. And that kind of, as you indicate, sent her on the road to figuring out how to be creatively fulfilled while married to a kind of a drip.
Okay. And so there are so many interesting surprises about how she made her journey. One of them was that before she got to creative writing, because she's with this dull guy, she tried many other things creatively. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that was funny. So she was having a lot of angst. I mean, she realized, okay, I have the husband, I have the 2 kids, I have the nice house in suburban Jersey, a few miles from where I grew up. And why am I not fulfilled? And what she said was, had it been 10 years later, she would have sought therapy and she would have talked to the other women about it. But what she said to me was, in 1962, 63, sitting around poolside at Shackamaxon Country Club with the other moms, you didn't talk about stuff. You all pretended everything was perfect. She said several of those women ended up having breakdowns and being hospitalized. And she realized I better get something else in my life. And so her kids were off to elementary school. She had some time in the day. And first she started writing like pop songs. And she thought, oh, I'm good at coming up with melodies. But every time she had a melody she liked, the next day she'd hear that melody on the radio station and realize that she'd heard it on the radio and thought she'd written it, but it was actually a top 40 song. And then she went into, she tried writing like Dr. Seuss style rhyming books and illustrating them. She was going to be a...
You forgot the felt making.
No, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
That was, don't worry. She was illustrating, and I saw those old books in the archives, and she was like, she's a better doodler than I am, and maybe than most of us here, but she was not publishable level. And then I don't know how she got onto this. I should have asked. She started cutting out felt and gluing it to a canvas backing stretched over a frame in these like interesting designs. And she one day put them in a portfolio, crosses the bridge, goes to Bloomingdale's, meets with the children's buyer and says, would you sell these on consignment? And he said, sure. And she actually spent 6 months making these made-to-order felt designs that like you'd hang in a children's nursery. And but then she had a skin allergy to the glue. She had a lot of skin issues, a lot of which were psychosomatic. When she'd have anxiety, she had eczema that was very bad. But she was having bad reactions to the glue, and I think she also realized this is like not my calling. So then one day she gets in the mail, through the mail slot comes a brochure from her alma mater, NYU, advertising adult continuing ed classes. And one of them is writing for children. So she says to her husband, John, she asks him, pretty please, would you be willing to put the kids to bed one night a week so I can go take a class? And he agrees. And Monday night she starts going into the city and taking this class.
I was gnashing my teeth through all of this. If we can skip ahead,
Yeah.
she starts writing and getting some good response.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a while. So
yeah.
it wasn't overnight at all by any and you know, she just decided to do this. So
Right.
she didn't really have anybody to help her along until she started putting pieces together of people who would sort of mentor her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's with this dull guy, and he just doesn't get that she's doing something that's pretty interesting.
I mean, he's kind of in his own head. He's working 5 days a week as a lawyer up in Newark, and then he's golfing on weekends and paying a little attention to his kids. And as long as the house is clean and there's food on the table, at one point he tells one friend that he appreciates Judy's writing career because it keeps her out of Saks, like, you know, keeps her away from the charge cards. I mean, and you know, that was him at his worst, I guess. He wasn't a cruel person, but that he was snarky and non-supportive, to say the least, about her career.
And didn't get her talent at all.
And didn't get her talent. And even once she started selling books, he would make comments like, well, you know, we'll celebrate when you're earning as much as I am. I mean, he was kind of a jerk specifically about the career. Like, he was not, you know, his kids remember him fondly as a good dad. And Judy was fairly protective of him and talking to me about it. You know, one thing I've spoken about in some interviews is that, actually, I mentioned this in the epilogue of the book, that after she read a draft of it, one of the notes she had was she felt I was too nice to John Blume, to her ex-husband. And then in a different draft, she felt I was too mean to John Blume. I mean, she's very conflicted because on the one hand, he was not always super supportive. On the other hand, he tried hard to be a good dad. They were pretty good co-parents after the divorce. Like, it was not, you know, it could have been worse. And I think a lot of her friends, when they tried to get out of their marriages in the 70s, there was some real cruelty and sadism. And John Blume was fundamentally a pretty nice person, but he was not the man for her, and he was not the man to support a wife with a career like that.
Okay, so now let's go back to her earliest success. Even though it wasn't monumental at that moment, the book that really got people saying, hey, you got something here, and then propelled her to go forward. Let's talk about what you think from your writing was the book that really turned the corner for her.
I mean, certainly Margaret, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, was the book. And it was her third book, but they were all published within a year of each other. So she was taking this class, and as homework for the class, she started drafting Iggy's House, which was it was not the first book she finished, but it was the first book that she sold. And usually not everyone has read Iggy's House, even among her fans, but it's about a white neighborhood, and a black family is moving into the neighborhood, and some of the parents in the neighborhood are against it, and one kind of mean old biddy on the street is trying to like pull together a petition to, stop whatever that would mean to stop them. And the protagonist is a nice girl who likes the family and is trying to persuade her mom to be more receptive to them. So this book sells, and then the one in the middle is The Green Kangaroo sells, and they both come out very close to each other from different publishers. And then Margaret. And she knew Margaret was a breakthrough. I mean, I found the note in her archives where she says to her editor, Dick Jackson, like, I'm now working on something really good. It's about this girl named Margaret. And like, that was kind of sent chills down my spine to read that. I was like, this is the moment when she was saying, like, wait till you see what's coming next. Because they'd sold Iggy's House. They published Iggy's House, and it had done fine. It got reviewed, it sold a little, but it was nothing. She wasn't a star. And I think she knew, like, Margaret was going to do it in some big way. It was the first book where she wrote in the first person, and she really inhabited the character. And it's just like, it's for older kids, and she's moved into a different, more like middle school range from early grade. And it was just super personal. And she just found her voice with this character. I mean, from the very first line, which is, "Are you there, God? Mm-hmm. It's me, Margaret." Like, it starts with a prayer, and it's this super personal relationship. If you remember, the book is structured around regular prayers to God. And it's incredibly poignant. Like, to read it again for the first time is to realize it's not really a book about menstruation and breast development. It's really a book about a girl trying to figure out her relationship to the universe, to God, to spirituality. And it's just incredibly profound. And it was once she accessed that like the career really came.
So I shared with Mark that when I read "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret," I forgot all the other adolescent issues, and that for me, growing up in the South, a very Bible Belt place, the fact that the name of the book was addressing God like casually was like, what now? Really got my attention.
Yeah.
And in the way that, her books could get the attention of young people.
Yeah.
And I was just like, she's having this casual conversation with God, but at the same time questioning whether or not God is really possible for her. And so that was monumental, response from me and many other people. I'm sure some of you here. So I understand why it was pivotal, but that
was huge. And it's more than that. It's like I think she's the first daughter of an interfaith marriage in young people's literature, because dad is Jewish and mom is from a Christian family where they sort of rejected mom when she married this Jewish guy. Who's ever seen the movie? A few of you seen the movie's really good. Came out maybe 3 years ago. And "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." They made a movie version of it with Rachel McAdams as the mom, and Kathy Bates as the grandma, and it's fabulous. But that reminds you that the book is also about religious tension in the family, interfaith relationships. It's like very, very deep, and I think that we make a mistake when we remember it as a book that's just about puberty and body development stuff. It is about that, but it's really about a search to find oneself and to find one's place in the world.
So she's made the pivot, and what's happening is that the young readers are really responding to her, and she knows just how to sort of position what some of us would call issues, but you're being very clear that she really doesn't write issue books. And by the way, she doesn't write young adult books.
Yeah.
So
that's right. I mean, she points out to me, like, there was no YA category at the time. And she doesn't write for teenagers. She's really writing for 10, 11-year-olds, right? Because kids like reading books about slightly older kids. So if you're writing characters who are 14, you're really writing for 11-year-olds. So compared to some of the stuff that gets positioned as, young adult now, which is like more for young high schoolers or something, or for middle schoolers reading about 17 or 18-year-olds, she's not writing for that, and she's very clear about that. But also, there was no such category, so it's a kind of anachronism. Like, there wasn't as much young people's literature back then. So that's right. So she wasn't writing YA fiction. And the other thing that, as you point out, is she did not think of herself as an issues novelist or a problem novelist. And she really bridles at people who try to say, oh, well, she wrote with an agenda. She was trying to help people. She's an artist. And what she says is like, I was writing characters. Margaret was not about, Then Again, Maybe I Won't was not about masturbation and mental health and shoplifting and all the other stuff that pops up. It was about Tony. And Tony Miglione had some of those issues. And so they came up in his life because when you're 12 or 13, stuff comes up in your life. But it was about the character. It was character first. I mean, in that way, she's saying, like, I'm a literary fiction writer, which is I proceed from the characters. She just had the common sense to say, when you're 11 or 12 years old, some of these puberty issues, body issues, sexuality issues are the stuff of your life.
They actually happen.
They actually happen.
Yes.
And they're actually not radical. They're actually normal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people often also talk as if she like was bringing all these radical, unexpected things into. But if you think about it, like, there's nothing radical or unusual about getting your period. There's nothing radical or unusual about masturbation. She was actually putting profoundly normal things into fiction, and people were then losing their minds.
Right. So it was radical because she was writing about it.
So she was writing about
yes,
it.
Yes.
And she was writing about it in a vocabulary meant for 11 or 12-year-olds, because this stuff was all over adult fiction. You know, there's if you go read Faulkner and Hemingway and Fitzgerald, there's sex, there's incest, there's abuse, there's rape, there's like, it's all there, but that was for adults. And Judy had read that stuff on her parents' bookshelf because her parents let her read whatever she wanted. But what she was doing was putting it in a vocabulary and a marketing, scheme for 11 or 12-year-olds, and that's what set people off.
So talk about the intense response from her readership. These kids are seeing their normal lives expressed in a way that really gets to what they're going through, and they don't feel like they can talk to many other people about. Maybe they're embarrassed.
Right.
Maybe they just wouldn't say it because nobody in their young community is talking about it in that way. And she starts to get billions of letters,
Yeah.
which she answers some of them.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
No, she's getting at 2,000 letters a month. And she doesn't answer them all personally, obviously, but that's when she first hires an assistant, is to help her. She responds to many of them personally, and then others, they get a brochure or a signed photograph or a letter. But like her, at one point I write that no writer has collapsed the distance between herself and her fandom the way Judy has. And today, of course, that's part of the expectation, especially if you write for young people, is that you be accessible and you show up at Comic-Con and you send them pictures, like you correspond with them on social media. But that nobody did that back then. I mean, her peers were people, Beverly Cleary was already quite famous. She didn't like her readers very much. She was a bit, touchy. And S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders, is completely anonymous. Probably no one here knows her real first name. Okay, so who said that?
Me.
Yeah, you do. You're the first person.
One of my
I always put that out there, and you're the first person. Because usually half the audience doesn't know if S.E. Hinton was male or female.
Kid, I thought it was the guy who wrote
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
Like, when
But,
the kid
you know,
read it when it came out, yeah.
S.E. Hinton, now I'm going to tell you stuff you know, but S.E. Hinton wrote The Outsiders in 1968 or 69, right before the era of, a year before Judy breaks onto the scene with Iggy's House and then Margaret. And Judy was very much reading her stuff. But S.E. Hinton wrote these 4 books, this quartet of books, Rumblefish and Tex, and that was then, This Is Now, and The Outsiders, in about 5 or 6 years. She starts at age 16, and then she gets married, and she stays in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and works in her husband's shoe shop for the next 50 years. And there are no pictures of, it's hard to find a picture of her. It's not that there are none, but there's very little cult of personality around Beverly Cleary or S.E. Hinton or E.L. Konigsberg or some of these other people. And Judy realizes, wait, I can go interact with these fans and form these relationships. And yes, they passionately attach to her. I mean, to this day, if she walks down a street for, a mile, she will get recognized. Someone will break into tears and want to hug her. I mean, it's a very powerful attachment to this day.
And one of the questions you keep asking through the book is, why her? Why is that? We know the powerful attraction, but other authors could be popular and have relationships with their readers, but there's a little bit something when the name Judy Blume is mentioned, it feels like she's attached to formative years or formative experiences that stick with people in a different way.
I mean, you never love the way you love when you're 13 or 14, right? So that's part of it, is like the same way that the songs that make me tear up or what was on the radio in 1987. I'm sure you all have this experience, right? There's certain songs you hear from about that age. And I think there's science behind this, right? It has to do with like stages of development and hormones and whatever. But the there is a way in which the author you fall in love with at 13 or 14 is much more important than anything you discover in your 20s or 30s. And so I think that's part of it, is that she's writing for that age group. But then in terms of the why her, which was a question her husband posed to me, not John Bloom, this third husband, the one who worked out.
The good husband.
The good husband, right? Whom she's been with for 46 years.
Yes.
Like, it really worked. She met him in 1980 and it really worked out. And George and she are like still madly in love. But he pulled me aside at one point and said, the thing you have to do with your book is answer, why her? And he said, I don't know why her. I mean, he knows why he loves her, but he doesn't. It's a mystery why anyone becomes that big. And I think that part of it is she's writing for a fan base of people who fall in love with her works at an impressionable age. Part of it is she came along at a moment when the world was ready for this kind of realism for young people. And part of it is that she was prolific. Like, there wasn't just one book that you could read. There weren't even, with S.E. Hinton, there were 4. Mm-hmm. She produced 10 in the first 5 years. And like, we're talking, Iggy's House, and then Margaret, and then again, Maybe I Won't, and Blubber, and Deanie, and starring Sally J. Freeman herself. I mean, she had this 5-year period that was unlike almost any period of literary fruitfulness in the world, ever. I mean, it's very hard. I mean, Shakespeare produced at that clip, for 25 years, 30 some odd plays. Like, but it's almost nobody produces that well at that clip the way she was at the beginning. So people could read again, you finish one, you grab the next one, you go to the library, check the next one out. There was a period in the 80s where if you looked at the bestseller list at Walden Books or B. Dalton, to date myself, on the children's bestsellers, the top 7 or 8 would always be Judy Blume. It'd be like Judy, 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 Chronicles of Narnia, Judy, Judy, Charlotte's Web, Judy, Judy. There was a little C.S. Lewis and there was a little E.B. White and maybe a Tolkien, maybe a Lord of the Rings, but basically it was Judy, 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 Judy. And so that was also part of it, was like she was prolific. And then, of course, she got out and met the fans. So, like, there's no one else quite like that.
So, Mark, you were one of those people very taken with Judy's work, and had actually written about her before this book.
Yeah.
So talk about that first interest in her work, and then that eventually led you to decide to do this larger piece.
Yeah, that takes me back. So I was 22 and just out of college, and I had this notion that I wanted to be a writer, which was not something I'd arrived in college wanting to do. It had like arisen junior or senior year. I had jettisoned my early plans. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be a writer, I better write something. And I literally sat down one day at like, trying to remember if it was my Apple IIe or if I'd upgraded to a Macintosh. I was probably on a Mac Classic by then, and started writing about a writer who was about, they say write what you know. When you're 22, like, what do you know? So I just started writing about how much she had meant to me. And I wrote a couple pages, printed them out on the dot matrix printer, mailed them all, and so I mailed it to the New York Times Book Review. I mean, like the ego of that, right? And about a month later, I got a letter back in the mail from saying, we like it, and we have some suggestions. If you're open to edits, we would consider publishing it. And I thought, I'm open to edits. Yeah, that'll be fine. And so then I had to find a fax machine, because that's how they edited back then, was faxes. So I found one, and we did and then it appeared, and it was this back page essay in the Times Book Review. They had the whole back page, and it was something like why people still love Judy Blume. I forget what they titled it. But then I got a letter from her a week later. She saw it and she liked it, and somehow she tracked me down, and I got a letter in the mail saying, I really thank you for saying such kind things about me and such a thoughtful, smart piece. I hope we meet at some point. Yours truly, Judy. And I was like, it was unreal. It's as unreal to talk about now as it was then. So we ended up staying in very loose touch over the years, which is to say, like every 5 years, we'd exchange a letter or an email. And then about 15 years ago, I suggested maybe I should write your biography. And she was offended. She wrote back and said, well, I'm not ready for a biography yet. I mean, she was like, I'm only 70. Why would you write my biography? And I realized that was a touchy thing. I had not clocked how it would feel to be told your life is sufficiently over that. And so I backed off. I gingerly suggested it once or twice more over the next decade. And then I dropped it. And then in 2022, she'd been very, kind of I think, hunkered down with COVID and maybe thinking about mortality. I'm just guessing, but she reached out to me and said, maybe we should talk about you doing that biography.
And you were thrilled.
Yeah, I mean, I was on some incredibly boring Zoom. I mean, remember, like, what else were we doing in the summer of 2022 except being on incredibly boring Zooms? And I think I don't normally have my email set to like alert me, but I think in that Zoom era I did because I was looking for distractions. And I was on some very boring Zoom pretending to pay attention. And the little email alert came in, said new email from, and then it gave her email address, which I knew. Yeah, so I was in the basement office. I remember ran upstairs and sort of showed my wife, like, look, Judy. So yeah, that was cool.
So I'm always curious, when particularly for someone like you who knew a lot about her in your early fandom before you began doing the research, what most surprised you as you were putting together her story?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know so much about her, so there were a lot of surprises. I would say one big surprise was how much rejection she suffered. And I'm an author. I mean, when you're in the arts or media, like our lives are rejection, right? Like the amount of jobs we go out for, the amount of times we audition, the amount of times we submit our reel or a tape or a manuscript, it's like mostly rejection.
Yes.
And then sometimes you hit. I guess maybe I thought it would have been different for her, and I was completely wrong. And sitting in the archives at Yale, where she's donated 130 boxes of her papers, and the box, I don't remember the number, let's call it box 37, which is the rejection slips. And you see that from the time she started this class in the fall of '67 at NYU Night School, for the next 2.5 years, first of all, she wrote like a couple dozen books. Some were very short picture books, some were slightly longer chapter books, but she was writing constantly. I talk about this in the book. I like quote from a few of her books that didn't make it, which are the full manuscripts are in the archives. And then she saved her rejection letters, rejection from Simon & Schuster, rejection from Harper & Row, rejection from Knopf, from Little Brown. Like every publisher rejected Judy. And some are nice, and some are mean, and some are condescending. And I just thought, and she had no community of people. She didn't have a writer's group. She didn't have an agent yet. She didn't have any editor cheering her on. Her husband was dismissive. Her father was dead. Her mother was clueless about what she was up to. Her kids were little, and she couldn't talk about these ambitions with the other wives. So she was just like, imagine getting all those rejections and just kind of swallowing them down for 2 years and not giving up. And of course, that also goes to your question of why her? I mean, resilience,
Yes.
grit. Like, think of how many of our greatest authors we never met because they couldn't.
Gave up.
Because they gave up.
Yeah.
Because they were perfectly human and said enough already. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that surprised me.
What's your favorite Judy Blume book?
Starring Sally J. Friedman as herself.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah, I think that one is. So she's written about 20-something children, young people's books, some for very little kids, like the Fudge books, some for older kids, some for couple that you would now call YA, and then 4 adult books. And I actually find the adult books kind of interesting, and I try to defend books like Wifey, which were her adult books were not critically adored. Let's put it that way. And I think there's something to be said for them. But there's something about the Sally J. Friedman book. It's her most autobiographical. It's about a girl whose family moves to Miami Beach for 2 years after World War II because the girl's older brother is sickly. And that was back when if you were sickly, they told you to move to a warm climate, which I don't think is the medical advice anymore, right? Is that the medical advice anymore, my doctor friend? But I was saying to my wife, like, do you think next time one of the kids gets an ear infection, we have to move to Florida? Like, wouldn't it be great if the doctors prescribed, go to the beach? But in real life, this happened. Her older brother, David, was getting some what they called kidney infections. And the doctor said, go to Florida. So they went, mom, the 2 kids, and grandma all went to Florida for 2 years. And down there, she kind of flourished. She was taking dance classes, and she was learning to love the beach, and she made a bunch of friends. But then she also thought that she saw Hitler everywhere. She had these morbid nightmares, that Hitler was, this is in the novel. And Judy, too, had these kind of haunted sense of having survived the war. And in the book, Sally thinks that Mr. Zavodsky, this old Jewish guy who hangs out on park benches, is secretly Adolf Hitler. And that's this interesting dark subtext of the book. So the book is on the one hand very upbeat and beachy and sunny and sort of blue sky. And on the other is a kind of fable of how people grappled with undiscussed trauma after World War II. And I'm shocked it hasn't been made into a movie. No one's even tried to make it into a movie. There, a bunch of her other books were optioned and not made, and I could talk about that. That's a big part of that I like in my book, of sort of getting into the Hollywood Judy. But Sally has just kind of been orphaned, and I think it's a great book.
So we can't leave out the elephant in the room with you and Judy because so close. She called you.
Yeah,
She drew you into
Yeah.
this project. You were all in.
yeah.
And then Judy, who writes letters to everybody all the time, stop writing.
Stop
to
writing to me. Well, so yeah, the Times did me the kindness of publishing this on a big article. So I was getting a lot of texts the next day saying, "What's going on with you and Judy?" What happened was the article was all the reporting on has been completely accurate, but to give some context, I have emails from her going through 2025, like a year and a half ago, which is about when we went to press. She helped me get photo permissions for one of the photos in the book. She was still responding to queries if I was in fact checking. She sent me a long memo about everything she thought that I got right and got wrong. And yes, and then at a certain point, she, I think, felt like the relationship is done. And that's, I think, to be expected almost. I mean, this is my first biography, but I've written enough magazine and newspaper articles about people. And of course, my other books have featured people as well. And you learn that like the relationship of a writer and subject runs its course. And, I never expected her to be touting the book or to be on book tour with me. I think it's my book. And that was also very clear between us from the start. What I will say is I don't know if she's read the final version because she gave me so many good notes along the way, very generously. And then, we didn't talk from the time this went to press until we had a bound book to send her. And of course we sent it to her. And, I hope she likes it. But ultimately, what I ultimately say is my job, I don't work for her and I don't really work for myself. I work for the reader. And the question is not whether I think it's the best book I could have done. I hope it is. It's not whether she thinks it's a great book. It's whether the readers are moved by the book. And that's the North Star. That's what I try to keep in mind at every step.
I think she read it, and I don't know if she'd love it, but I did.
Do you know something I don't?
No, I
read
don't
it,
think
right?
she read it because it would just kill me not to read it.
Not to read it.
Just see what you said.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for your questions, and that's what we want. Not your statements, your questions.
What can I tell you? Hi.
Hi. Thank you for being here. I guess when you were writing it, I'm sure there are many things you want us to know about her. Is there anything where as you were researching or you were writing, you're like, wow, I really hope people remember this or really read this and pay attention to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely the process of writing is the process of leaving stuff out, right? Because I certainly learned enough just from my research. I could write 1,000 pages on her. And so part of the job is to decide, most of the job between me and my editor is for us to figure out what to cut away. And the stuff that I think what I talked about earlier about the perseverance is certainly something that I hope people see. And I also think that I wasn't as explicit in the book I wasn't as explicit as I could have been about how important the women's movement was to her. Because it's not something she has talked a lot about or written much about. She's written almost no nonfiction, so she doesn't talk about her life much. So narratively, there wasn't a great place for me to kind of insert, by the way, what else is happening in 1970 is the women's movement, is the second wave feminism is happening. I do get it in there, but I hope that people are able to read in what I wrote that although her writing career started a couple years before that, and she didn't think of herself as having a feminist consciousness in 1967, 68, her career is in some ways unimaginable without the women's movement, because the women's movement, for one thing, was encouraging people to tell true stories. So, she's publishing at the same moment that Our Bodies, Ourselves is being published. She's publishing at the moment that Erica Jong is writing Fear of Flying, that there are these adult books coming out about women leaving difficult marriages or trying to gain their freedom. And of course, it's 1971, I think, that Ms. Magazine publishes its first issue. And that arrives at the Blume household because some of you might remember this or know this from history, from women's history, but Ms. Magazine was initially a special edition of New York Magazine. So if you subscribed to New York, every week, which, kind of upwardly mobile, fashionable suburbanites like to do. If you thought, well, if you identified with New York City, but you lived in Jersey, you got New York Magazine. And then one day, New York Magazine comes, and what falls out is this special insert called Ms., which it, turns out to be the pioneering feminist magazine. And she reads it. She reads it cover to cover. So I think that that's a really important part of the book that I don't get to talk about enough.
Hi, thanks for being here. Do you think she harbored a pang of regret that her adult novels didn't set her career?
Yeah.
I'm haunted by the Margaret Wise Brown biography by Leonard Marcus, where she went to her early death feeling as though she'd never made it as a writer, even though she wrote.
Isn't that crazy, by the way?
Yeah. So I'm not saying I agree that that's lost. I'm wondering.
One of the things I love about doing these events is I'm always fed questions I should have asked Judy, and I should have asked her that. How do you feel today about the reception? I mean, I certainly asked her more personal things than that, and I would actually love to know the answer to that. So, number one, let me say I don't know for sure, and I don't put words in her mouth. So what I'm now going to give you is conjecture. Wifey, which was her first of them, was really difficult because, she was basically telling in part the story of her first divorce, although she thinks John Blume never read the book, even though she sent it to him. And she, and it was reviewed, so there were some positive reviews, but a lot of negative reviews. And it was a book with a lot of sex in it. And there was a lot of controversy around this young people's author writing this incredibly lewd, I think it's fair to say lewd book. And so that was a tough period. But then she went on to write 3 more adult novels. And I think, she has said, I don't write great literature. I think she actually sells herself short there. I think some of her books are great literature, not the 4 adult ones. But, I'm sort of meandering because it's interesting. I don't know. Like, Wifey was a real event. We didn't talk a lot about Smart Women or, Summer Sisters, I think, got the reception she would have wanted. It's a very well-loved book. It's kind of on every Martha's Vineyard reading list. They're now adapting it for, it's in production for Netflix or Amazon Prime or something. It's kind of going to see a life on screen, which she likes. So I think that one is probably the one where she would say, it succeeded. And then the most recent one, her last book, In the Unlikely Event, was based on some real events in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and in the 50s. And I think she loved that book, and I think it got a warm reception. So I think that was a positive experience. But that's probably a part of her life that, that she hasn't put a bow on in a way. Yeah, it's a great question.
Do you have a sense of how different generations interact and relate to her work? Like, who is she to Gen X versus millennials versus Gen Z? Is Gen Alpha reading Judy?
What gen are you?
I'm millennial.
You're millennial. What is she to you?
Kind of similar as you've discussed. So part of me is thinking, maybe there's not that much of a difference.
My sense, and I don't have finely grained sales data on this. A lot of the data I have, I know that I actually do have very good sales data, but I never broke it down by I don't know how you break it down by who's buying them. I know that sales have gone down over the years, but who's the core audience now as opposed to the core audience, then I'm not so sure. If you look in children's bookstores, it's not like they're stocking a dozen of her books. They're stocking 3 or 4. It's often, I find, this is anecdotal, the comedies, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, Super Fudge, otherwise known as Sheila the Great. Those are books that hold up very well across generations, by the way, because they're funny, and comedy really travels, I think. But I will say, I've certainly, I have young children, I've talked to their friends, and one meets literate 12-year-olds who have not heard of her, which would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. So I think that's been, the main thing to keep in mind is, to the extent that she's a somewhat more marginal figure, not marginal, but somewhat more marginal, it's partly because of the boom in children's writing that she helped create. There's so much more of it now. And so you have, you have 7 Harry Potters to get through, and infinite Rick Riordans, Heroes of Olympus and Percy Jackson, and you have Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and you have, one could go on forever. And she was coming up at a time when major bookstores didn't have a children's section. You could find the Little House books or the Oz books often filed in the adult section, but you knew they were for a slightly younger audience. She helped create a world of fiction that then made her just one piece of it, I think. So.
What about Are You There, God? Does that sell still? I would think it would.
I forget. I know that, I think George, her husband, told me, or maybe she told me, it's, again, some of the sort of juvenile, I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that literally juvenile, the young people's ones, like Freckle Juice still sells really well. I think some of the ones for littler kids travel a little bit better. I mean, you have to remember Margaret, in which you attach your pad to a belt,
Yes.
was dated by the time it came out.
That's true.
So like, I don't think Margaret's a dated book, but it does feel a kind of like there's a nostalgic tinge to it.
Got it. There was a hand over here.
How do you feel like you were changed by the process of doing this book?
That's a good question. I mean, I sometimes get introduced now as a biographer, which is weird because that's a specific genre that I never worked in before. I think that, so the honest answer is less than you would think, because I've done a lot of magazine pieces, again, about single people. I've done profiles. And I've been down that path of like, it's so exciting when you meet them at first, and you get nervous when you have to ask the really difficult questions, so you save them for last. And and then you wonder, what are they going to think about it? And I hope I got it right. And what if I make a major mistake? I mean, and you have to do the thing of talking to their friends, and some of the friends, have only positive things to say, and some of them, use the opportunity to talk to you as a way to vent a little bit about their close friend. I mean, not that there was a lot of that with Judy, but I've sort of like the process of writing about one person, even for just a short newspaper piece, is a very weird psychodrama because you have so much power. Like when somebody when I write about somebody, I get to do this thing that then becomes, for most people, like there's one story about them ever. Judy, there's thousands, but if I write about somebody for a newspaper profile and then it lives on Google, this is how they will be on Google for eternity. And that's that's a lot of power to hold. You have to use it responsibly. Sometimes you do your best and they still hate you. Sometimes they think it's great, even though you've had to say negative things. Some people are so just delighted to be written about that it doesn't matter what you say. And then other people are so vain that you could say that only the nicest things, but they're upset that you forgot to mention that they were having, a good hair day or something, or they were so proud of their new glasses and you didn't mention the new glasses. And I mean, I'm just making stuff up, but like some people you can't please no matter what, because you didn't say exactly the details they would want. So I think what I would say is I've written about people before, and this was just doing it for longer. And it has all of the pleasures and all of the stresses and difficulties that I kind of knew existed.
As I was reading this, I was thinking about your background in American religious history and the different types of work that you've done. And what I was fascinated by is how much context you were able to give to Judy's life. It wasn't just a storytelling of a step-by-step, but it was a storytelling really of American history throughout. And what I wondered was, where did you have to put in the most work to support your storyline and to try to understand her in context?
Yeah, you've touched on, so let me answer the question first and I'll make a slightly more meta comment. I think I do the most work trying to figure out the 40s and 50s. Like for some reason, I think because our parents are from the 60s in a way, like that felt, my parents have told me lots about what it was like to be in high school in 1960s or 61, 62. But she was in high school in the early 50s, and I think that era felt very distant, the kind of pre-war, war, post-war era. So that to me was a lot like, I better really try to understand what that was like. When families really only had one car, and when so many of the mothers didn't drive, and when everybody had a relative from the old country, and when for a Jew to date a Catholic was like something people talked about at the high school. Like it was just, that had really broken down by the 70s, let's say, but it was lingering, but but in the 40s, that was incredibly important. So that was really hard for me. But the other thing I'll say is like, you're right to catch on to the fact that a biography is also a book about the country and the world at the time the person lived. And Judy has lived almost a century. So I had to make decisions about how much do I zoom out and say, here's what was going on in New York publishing in the 70s when Judy is publishing. Here's what was going on with divorce laws when she's looking for a divorce. Like for everything she did, you could do a 20-page segue on how the legal climate, how the cultural climate, how the weather, how the Cold War and the space race with the Russians. I mean, everything. You could always zoom out and say, how did this affect this? And at some point you have to decide how tight do you keep the focus on her. So I have some misgivings at places where I think I should have said more about the women's movement, about the Cold War, about politics, the Kennedy years. Like I had that was a delicate balance to walk, is like how much about her and how much about the context.
I also just want to, if nobody else has a question, I just want to get in. There's a reason that Sabrina, in doing her intro, quoted Tayari Jones, because Judy has a whole other career of connecting other authors that you would know now. And she was, I didn't know this. I know Tayari pretty well. She's never mentioned that until I read it in your book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Judy's turned into a great citizen of literature, which is that she's a connector, she's a mentor. There are stories of other well-known writers she mentored that didn't make it into this book. But yes, and of course her fight against book banning and censorship, that's become like a second career to her, is working with the National Coalition Against Censorship, and really like there was a period where she was testifying in court for bookstores, and she was, I mean, to this day, she will get out her stationery and write a note on behalf of some author who's being challenged or something. So, and that too goes to her own longevity, because librarians adore her, booksellers adore her, everyone wants to keep her career going because she's such a good citizen of the literary world.
We've only touched a little bit of what's in this book. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you all
so
for
much,
coming. It's really
Mark.
kind of you to do.
Thank you. Be looking for you.
Now go support your independent bookstore.
That's right. Line up.